Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. The Wolves beat the Blazers. The shorthanded Wolves beat the Blazers on Saturday. How did they do it? We'll talk all about Jaden McDaniels' career-high night, Jalen Clark, and the young Wolves off the bench, and more. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I am the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. Good time watching the big football game on Sunday. And, of course, Wolves basketball Saturday night. This is a bit of a hybrid post-game pod. We'll peek ahead at the week and talk about I want to close today with something that the Wolves have really changed over the last, call it 5 weeks or so, really since the start of the calendar year. And it's something we'll dig in a bit more on later this week. But I want to start with the Blazers game Saturday. Really impressive win for Minnesota, trailing by as many as 15, shorthanded, missing, 4 of their top 6 rotation guys, 7 rotation guys. Like a lot to unpack here. So we'll do that, and then we'll talk a bit about some of those other topics I mentioned, and that'll be today's show. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Also, you can subscribe to the Locked On Wolves daily newsletter at lockedondaily.com. It's one-stop shop for all things Timberwolves. Again, sign up at lockedondaily.com. All right. So the Timberwolves came into this game. Anthony Edwards was questionable, ultimately did not play. He injured his hip in the win a couple nights prior and had been actually kind of looked like he'd been in pain for a little while. And good that he was questionable and ruled out shortly before the game. Although with only 3 games until the All-Star break, who knows how available he'll be. He's officially questionable for tonight's game against Cleveland. But it wouldn't be a shock if he sits a little bit more here leading into the All-Star break. Although I bet he probably wants to play in the All-Star game itself. And if he sits the next 3 games, it seems unlikely he'd play in that game. So we'll probably know more here very shortly. Also, I should say, I'm recording this late on Sunday. We're supposed to find out the ownership result on Monday, too. So we'll talk about that a bit on probably Tuesday or Wednesday's show, depending on what all there is to say about it. But anyway, coming into this game, no Anthony Edwards, no Mike Conley, obviously still no Julius Randle, and no Dante DiVincenzo. So if you're keeping score at home, given that DiVincenzo was a starter when he got hurt, that's 4 of the Wolves' 5 preferred starters that are out. Well, actually, no, that's not true. He took Mike Conley's spot. 3 of the Wolves' 5 preferred starters and 4 of the top 7 rotation guys, leaving only Rudy Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, and Reid as 3 of those top 7 rotation guys available. That meant that Luka Garza, who struggled over the last few games, was getting rotation minutes. It meant Joe Ingles was pressed into rotation duty. Jalen Clark played 32 minutes off the bench in this game. Rob Dillingham got his first career start. And Jaden McDaniels was the feature of the Wolves offense. Jaden McDaniels led the Timberwolves in field goal attempts. And I don't know an easy way to search this, but I bet he's only done that maybe one other time, maybe 2 other times ever. A weirdly high volume night for Jaden McDaniels, and he did not disappoint. We'll get into that. But the moral of the story is that the Wolves were going to come into this thing missing a lot of firepower. In the first quarter, it was a lot of Reid, and he was really the driving things for Minnesota offensively. And like Rob Dillingham got off to a rough start. He airballed his first shot attempt. The offense had a little bit of flow to it. Like it looked okay. And thankfully the defense looked, I would say connected. Minnesota was up by a bucket at the end of the first quarter, but the second quarter things fell apart. The Wolves had another rough bench stint. Luka Garza struggled again. Terrence Shannon got into the game. I thought he was okay, but didn't really provide the physicality he's supposed to provide. And it's not like they were getting out and running on Portland. And Minnesota's defense that was so good in the first quarter was just not good in the second quarter. And Portland, to their credit, was making shots. There isn't a magic bullet here for what went wrong for Minnesota. It was just they got outplayed in the second quarter, and their shorthandedness really showed up. Remember, Portland, despite being 6 games under 500 coming in and being supposed to be one of the league's worst teams this year, they've been winning. They won a few games in a row, I think 5 in a row coming into this game, and were expected to, the expectation is that they'll continue to improve, right? Like, this is a relatively young team this side of Jeremy Grant and DeAndre Ayton. And Robert Williams III, who got hurt during this game, was playing really well and then got injured. But, with the likes of Shaden Sharp and Scoot Henderson and I would say even Denny Avdia, like there's some, and Anthony Simons, who's at this point less of a young player, but certainly a good player. There's a lot to like about this Portland team. So this, and I said coming in, this was an important game to win because of what's upcoming on the schedule. The next 3 games before the break are extremely difficult. And Portland just outplayed them in the second quarter. And this was a 13-point deficit at halftime. They were down. Wolves were down by as many as 15. It was 13 at halftime. It was 13 in the third quarter. And then the Wolves went on a bit of a run mid-late third quarter, got it down to 8 points going to the fourth. And then they were down by 4 when Chris Finch put in a lineup that was, it was the starters minus Nickeil Alexander-Walker plus Jalen Clark. So this version of the starters is Rudy Gobert and Naz Reid in the front court, and then McDaniels, in this case, Jalen Clark instead of Alexander-Walker, and then Dillingham. And interestingly, we actually saw that same lineup, but with Alexander-Walker instead of Dillingham at times. They went on a 21-3 run to give Minnesota a commanding lead, and at that point, they never looked back. And it was really, there was a bit of defense turning into offense, which is something that I've been clamoring for the Wolves to do more of. I think depending on opponent, it's those fast break opportunities for a team that struggled at times in the half court are really important. And for the game, they only had 8 fast break points. They got out fast break by like 20 points last time out, even though they won that game. But they were opportunistic in those moments, and they limited offensive rebound opportunities for Portland. Ultimately, in the game, Portland had 16 offensive rebounds, which is too many. But in the third and fourth quarter, Minnesota really cut those opportunities off. They did a much better job inside. Rudy Gobert got out-physicaled in the first half, like big time. Looked like he was kind of like half-hearted about the whole thing. Like, hey, a lot of our best players aren't playing. Like, I don't know, do I really want to be out here? Like, that's the vibes that Gobert's performance gave off. And I'm being brutally honest when I say that. But I also want to be equal parts. Like, second half, Gobert looked like he was a man on a mission. Like, he controlled the paint defensively, had a couple of very nice plays, only credited with one block, which was the big block that led to Jaden McDaniels' go-ahead bucket midway through the fourth quarter on the other end on a fast break opportunity that was keyed by the Gobert block. But he locked down the paint defensively. He ended up with 11 rebounds, which was a team high, second highest in the game. He had 3 offensive rebounds in this game, but really kind of controlled the paint, I would say, on both ends of the floor in the second half. For as bad as he was, and I thought he played poorly in the first half, he was great in the second half. And you layer on top of that what Jaden McDaniels, who we'll talk more about, what Nickeil was doing, what Naz Reid was doing, and you could throw in Jalen Clark and Rob Dillingham at times. Like, those guys were pushing pace. They were making the right decisions with the ball in their hands for the most part. I think even though Dillingham shot the ball horribly and the 3-point shot has been way off of late, he had 2 air balls and he hit the side of the backboard on another attempt in this game. But I thought that the process and the result of the decision-making of, do I pass, do I shoot, what type of pass am I throwing, who am I passing to? Like, there was a beautiful pocket pass Dillingham had to Rudy in the second half. The actual function, the decision-making process for Dillingham and Jalen Clark for rookies was very impressive in this game. And the third quarter was kind of where the tide started to shift. And then that lineup I mentioned a moment ago, which was starters, but with Jalen Clark in the game instead of Alexander Walker, and then ultimately instead of Dillingham, that led to a 38-14 fourth quarter advantage. I believe Portland made 3 field goals in the fourth quarter of this game. They scored 14 points, but a lot of that was free throws. Minnesota really locked it down defensively, and I credit Rudy Gobert primarily. Now, Jalen Clark was good on the perimeter. Nickeil was great. But Rudy was very, very good protecting the paint. And I mean, Portland only had 7 made threes in this game. There were 7 of 35. Somehow Minnesota only attempted 28 threes. I want to get back to that because there's been a clear shift in Minnesota's offensive strategy here of late. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. We'll talk about briefly, we'll do studs and duds. I want to talk about a couple individual performances before we move on to some bigger picture topics. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Skims. When I found out that Skims was making underwear for men, I was intrigued. I've heard a ton about their quality from friends and family, so I had to give it a try. And let me tell you, Skims absolutely live up to the hype. I, like many others, have had issues with finding the right underwear between fit, comfort, or just the right style for you. It can be a challenge. And of course, comfort's the most important thing when it comes to underwear. Skims changed all of that. Their men's line offers something for everyone from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. I tried the Skims Stretch 5-inch boxer brief. I like the stretch. The cotton are good too. I like the 5-inch. I like the inseam to be a little bit longer. And the stretch, I like the breathable material. They fit better than workout underwear, but it kind of gives you that same flexibility. So like if you're going to go work out, if you're going to be active, you're going to be walking around all day for your job or whatever, it's the absolute best way to go would be the Skims 5-inch boxer. They're perfect if you're active. If you're working out, running errands, just working, if you're walking around a bunch, they're the most comfortable and reliable underwear that you can own. Plus, the lightweight material feels amazing, almost like you're wearing nothing at all. Shop Skims Men's at skims.com and Skims stores. Let them know that we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select this show in the drop-down menu that follows. Again, select podcast in the survey, then select Locked On Wolves. If you're looking for the perfect gift for your Valentine or for yourself, Skims just launched their best Valentine's shop ever, available in sizes for women, men, kids, and yes, even pets. Again, skims.com and at Skims stores at skims.com. Select podcast in the survey. Select this show in the drop-down menu. All right, a couple additional notes from this game. We talked about how the Wolves got out rebounded on the offensive glass 16-8. However, a lot of that damage was done early, and it was shored up late by Minnesota. That was a concern in this game against Portland, against DeAndre Ayton, against others, Klingon, Donovan Klingon, some of these guys that are active and just big, long bodies that are playing hard for Portland here lately for head coach Chauncey Billups. And the Wolves did a good job on the glass in the second half. They did a pretty good job controlling the running game for Portland. And as mentioned, they dominated the paint. The Wolves were a plus 12 in points in the paint. They also made 3 more threes on 7 less attempts. They were 36% from 3. Portland was just 20% from 3. And Minnesota also a big part of that first half offense, which was limited. Minnesota only had 47 points at halftime. A big chunk of that was because of the free throw line. They were I think they got the line 17 times in the first half. They only made 10 or 11 of them. So making free throws was a problem, but free throws is what was keeping them in the game early in this one. And that's indicative of a larger offensive pattern for Minnesota, which I do want to get to here in a moment. I keep kind of alluding to that. We'll get to it here, I promise. Individual performances in this game, we could might as well just do this with studs and duds. I don't want to dig in too much further since, when they play Saturday, we do the Monday show. I try to do, not just a straight post-game pod since we're now a day plus removed. So we'll do this relatively quickly. Jaden McDaniels was great. We got to spend a bit more time on him. He had 30 points on 12 of 17 shooting, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, and a steal. What was notable about his performance was, well, there were a lot of things, but one of the key things is he scored 30 points without making a single three-pointer. And we know that Jaden McDaniels, after a couple of years ago, he was a little over 40% from 3. That was clearly something of an outlier, and we know he struggled last year from outside the arc. The three-point shot he's become less reliant on that in the half court. And it is actually less important for him to shoot the three really well when Ant's not on the floor. Because when Ant's on the floor, he's getting these open three-point opportunities more frequently because of teams loading up on Ant. And it makes more sense for him to shoot a wide open corner 3 than to try and drive when the defense is going to collapse on him. Just shoot the catch and shoot 3. And that's been an area the last year and a half or so he's struggled a bit with. With no Anthony Edwards, he's going to take guys off the dribble because nobody's getting doubled. So he's going to have one-on-one situations. And even if guys are not closing out to the touch, and it's more of like a half-hearted closeout. Jaden's long enough with a quick enough first step, and weirdly, like, he's long and athletic, but he plays with a slower pace, not exactly like a Luka pace, or he doesn't use the Ant decel in the same way that Ant uses it. When I say Luka, I mean Luka Doncic, by the way. But he doesn't play as fast as a lot of guys of his size will. He's got this kind of deliberate pace to his game in the half court, and it continues to improve, and he just continues to look more comfortable. In the month of February, which sounds arbitrary, but it's actually like right when his game shifted. Like in the four last games of January, he attempted single-digit shots every game. In the 5 games so far in February, he has 10 or more shots. And actually, in 4 of the 5 games, he has 15 or more shot attempts. And again, he led the team in shot attempts in this game. So he's shot the ball 75 times over the last 5 games. He's shooting 52% from the field. He's 35% from 3 on an average of 4 attempts per game. Now he's 0 for 5 in his last 2 games. He got to the line 7 times in this game. So overall, in the last 5 games, he's got Jaden McDaniels got to the line 16 times, and he's shooting the ball well from there. He's averaging in the month of February, again, 5 games. I want to be clear about that. 19.8 points and 9 rebounds per game, which is the other crazy thing. And if you want to go back further, and I'm not going to dig too much right now, but like in the month of January, he averaged 6.4 rebounds per game, which was up a half rebound from the month of December, which was up nearly 2 rebounds from the month of November, which was up from 2.8 rebounds per game in the month of October, which is only 4 games. So October, November, he's averaging around 5 rebounds a game. That goes up to about 6 a game in December. That goes up to 6.5 a game in January. And so far in the month of February, 5 games, Jaden McDaniels is averaging 9 rebounds per game. He's got 2 double-doubles. He's had at least 7 rebounds in every game. He's also had at least 2 assists in every game. He's had 4 assists in 3 games, and this was the only game in February he doesn't have a block shot. Moral of the story is Jaden McDaniels has just been more active. He's been everywhere. He's also not been as much foul trouble. He's played in at least 30 minutes now, and you have to go all the way back to January 4th for the last time he didn't play more than 30 minutes, and he played 29 minutes in that game. Like, the last time foul trouble truly impacted the way that he was used over the course of a game was December 27th when they beat Houston. He played 20 minutes and had 4 fouls in that game. He's been staying on the floor because he's been making good decisions defensively to keep himself on the floor. And offensively, he's been picking his spots. Jaden McDaniels has been legit good recently, and he was fantastic in this game. Was a primary reason for them winning. A career-high 30 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, and again, didn't even make a 3-point shot. He was 0 for 1 on threes because he simply was just beating guys off the dribble, hitting those weird little hanging floater jump shots that he shoots from 10, 12-ish feet away or closer sometimes, and actually got all the way to the rim a couple of times too. This was just a really impressive Jaden McDaniels performance. Another stud in this game, we're going to go Naz Reid. Naz was great in the first quarter when they needed to get off to a decent start, and they did. They were up 2 at the end of the quarter. Quiet in the middle stages, and then in the fourth quarter, Naz went off. He finished as a plus 29 in this game, which was by far a team high in a game that they won by 16. He had 23 points on 16 shots, 5 of 9 outside the arc, plus 8 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals for Naz Reid. A really strong Naz performance, and he was obviously a huge part of everything that happened down the stretch. The third stud, you could go Nickeil. I'm going to go Rudy Gobert because I truly believe he changed the tenor of the game, which with choosing to play more physical in the second half compared to what he did in the first half of this game. Rudy finished with 15 points on 4 of 6 shooting. He was also 7 of 10 at the free throw line. Like, don't look now, but the free throw shooting is now improving again. It was really good at the start of the year. Went through a period where it was as bad as it's been in a while for Rudy. Now he's back on a hot streak, 7 of 10. The Wolves will take that. 11 rebounds, 3 of them offensive, 1 assist and 1 block for Rudy Gobert. A very strong, dominant Rudy performance in this game. No duds. Well, I take that back. No duds. Luka struggled again. I thought he was much better, much more mobile on both ends of the floor in this game. He had a couple of assists. He had 4 boards in 8 minutes, but Garza continues to struggle offensively when they've really needed him. It's like ever since I said, whatever game that was like a week ago, he came in and played really well. And I said, man, it's nice to have somebody that's like, he's like a pinch hitter in baseball. Like, he's always ready to go. He struggled like the last 3 times out. So anyway, Jalen Clark, really good. I mentioned him in passing earlier. He played 32 minutes in this game. So he was fifth in minutes played for the 9 guys that saw the floor for Minnesota. He had 11 points and 4 of 6 shooting. He somehow only got up 1 3-point attempt and he drained it. He was absolutely wide open on the secondary break. Or actually, I think the Wolves turned the Blazers over in the backcourt and he was wide open. I don't know how he only got 1 3-point attempt, but Jalen Clark has been an absolute revelation on both ends of the floor. He chipped in 3 rebounds and 3 steals in 32 minutes. It was fantastic. We're going to talk a lot more Jalen Clark here in the coming days, that's for sure. All right. I think that's all I want to say about this one. What I want to do next is talk about the offense. We'll peek at the schedule, and I'm probably not going to spend a ton of time on the matchup for tonight, but we'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. For instance, I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing your team for a late game rally, you maybe feel good about how the Wolves are playing in the middle of the game, you think they're going to come back and win, or if you're picking a player to hit a clutch 3, you'll never feel like you missed your chance. You can always jump in and live bet. Plus, the app is easy to use. When you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, I want to talk about the offensive thing just quickly today, and I'm going to dig in more on Wednesday. If you feel like the Wolves are playing different offensively, you'd be correct, at least of late. I believe it was after Thursday's win over Houston, that second night of a back-to-back, impressive home win. Ant goes for 40-plus for a second straight night. Chris Finch said post-game, I'm completely paraphrasing now, but he was asked a question about the uptick in offensive rebound, and he gave like a bit of a mini soapbox speech about how offensive rebound around the league is ticking back up because teams are just crashing, right? Because the idea is, because for a while, the prevailing wisdom is if you don't get back defensively, you'll get beat the other way on a fast break. And like if you shoot and you crash and you don't contest, or excuse me, and you don't get back defensively, the other team's going to contest and release and get a bucket, right? Finch was saying that the plan, or the I guess the prevailing wisdom now is if you're crashing and you get the offensive rebound, the other team shouldn't get back and score anyway, because if they're contesting and releasing, you can now rebound 5-on-4 or 5-on-3. If you've got 2 guys lingering on the perimeter, you've got a better chance at an offensive rebound and scoring because they've already sent somebody down the other way to try and do the same thing. And so it's a little bit like the Moneyball inefficiency, right? Like the book and the movie Moneyball, teams were undervaluing on base percentage and overvaluing batting average. And then it became, if you're a baseball fan, the Tampa Bay Rays thing where teams were undervaluing defense, and the Rays had this method to figure out different metrics to track defensive efficiencies that teams were missing back, decade plus ago. This is kind of that thing. And for a while in the NBA, it was like the Chris Finch /Rockets /Rio Grande Valley Vipers that Finch coached, of like threes and layups, and getting to the free throw line, and some of these different things where teams are just trying to find the areas in which things are undervalued in the game. It makes a ton of sense, right? Well, one of the things now is offensive rebounding, because as I said, teams want to make sure they got back. Well, now it's swung back the other way. And so the Wolves have started to offensive rebound a lot more. They didn't do a ton of it last year. They did more of it, pre-Rudy Gobert, when they played a little bit faster and they had Jared Vanderbilt in that season with Patrick Beverley. And they were just a bit more breakneck in terms of trying to score in the open floor and trying to create a higher variance type game because their team didn't have as much talent. Like, for instance, in that was the team that played against Memphis in the playoffs and gave them a run for their money, went to 6 games as a 6 seed. And that's kind of what they're going for. Well, since January 1st, which is, now 5 weeks of play, the Timberwolves have played 21 games in that time frame, and they're 4th in the league in offensive rebound rate since January 1st, which is absolutely fascinating. I'm going to pull up what they did last year, but I promise you it wasn't anywhere near that high. And that's a conscious shift, and Chris Finch admitted as much when he was asked the question at the press conference after the game. I think it was the Rockets. It was the Rockets game the other on Thursday night. Last season, over the course of the entire regular season, remember, Minnesota won 56 games. I messed up my filters here on cleaning the glass. Here we go. They won 56 games. The offense was never anything to write home about last season. Minnesota was 21st in offensive rebound rate last season, a 25.6% offensive rebound rate. This season, since January 1st in 21 games, that's an over 31% offensive rebound rate for Minnesota. So 6 points higher than what it was last year, and they are 4th in the league since Jan 1. That's crazy to have that big of a shift mid-season. The other thing they're doing, and I should say for the season overall, they're 12th. So still a lot higher than last year's 22nd, finishing 22nd. But they're especially since Jan 1, that's changed. The other thing they're doing is getting to the line more often. And this is what I want to dig in more on Wednesday's show. And we're not going to do it now. But the short version is they're like top 5 in attempts at the rim this season. Or I'm sorry, since January 1st, they're top 5 in rim attempts. They're still top 10 in 3-point attempts, but the 3-point rate has gone down a little, and their mid-range jump shooting has gone down a little bit too. So they're doing both at the same time. They're shooting more threes, more layups, more free throws, less mid-range jumpers. All of the Rockets of 10, 12 years ago, the old Chris Finch philosophy, but they're also offensive rebounding more often, which can lead to more free throw opportunities. And that's, Rudy's getting to the line a bunch. He got to the line 10 times against Portland. So that's absolutely shifted. I want to, like I said, we're going to dig in more on Wednesday. Hopefully there's another Wolves win to talk about after the Cleveland game. That, who knows? If Ant doesn't play, he's questionable against Cleveland. That's not going to affect what I want to talk about. But hopefully it just underscores what we're going to discuss. Cleveland is, of course, a fantastic basketball team. They are currently 42-10. After they beat the Wolves a couple of weeks ago, they went on a 3-game losing streak. 2 of those losses against the Rockets, 1 against the Sixers. Then they won 4 straight, lost to the Celtics, and now they just beat the Pistons and Wizards. So they're 42-10. They've been the most consistent and best team in the league to this point in the season. The last time they played Minnesota, which was, like I said, a couple of weeks ago, it was January 18th, so nearly 3 weeks ago. That was a game that it was tied at halftime. Cleveland had a big third quarter and led by 10 going to the fourth, ultimately won by 7. Ant had 28, but it took him 22 shots to get it. And on the Cleveland side, Darius Garland was awesome, 29, 6, and 5. And Donovan Mitchell was very good too, 36 points on 27 shots, plus 8 rebounds, 7 assists. Since then, of course, some trades, some moves. George Niang and Karis LeVert are out. DeAndre Hunter's in for Cleveland, so that it looks a bit different. This is certainly a challenge of a game. It's one of those, the good old 1-game road trips that the Wolves have so many of. And that's what this is another 1-game road trip for the Wolves. As of now, Cleveland is 8.5-point favorites at home, which certainly insinuates that the market, or that FanDuel, believes that perhaps Anthony Edwards isn't going to play. I tend to agree. I think the Wolves may just try and hold him out. Maybe he plays in one of the 2 games. They've got a home back-to-back Wednesday, Thursday. So maybe he plays one of those to then allow him to prove he's healthy and maybe play in the All-Star break and not have to play a back-to-back and get a few days off. Who knows? But if he doesn't play, the Wolves being 8.5-point underdogs at Cleveland makes some sense. It's, overall, the Cleveland matchup isn't like horrific for the Wolves. Cleveland is first in offense. They're 8th in defense. Defensively, they're just outside the top 10 in turning other teams over. Offensively, they don't offensive rebound all that great. And they don't get to the line all that much, which are 2 things the Wolves occasionally will struggle with is getting a bit foul happy, getting a little grabby, although they've been better recently, and also defensive rebounding. Again, that's improved recently too. So Cleveland's a good team, and even with Ant, they'd be favored, especially in Cleveland with the Wolves traveling. But it's it could be a worse matchup. It's certainly a tough spot for Minnesota. That's a 6:00 tip tonight. But if the Wolves could play solid, not get beat out in transition, not give up a ton of offensive rebounds, and defend without fouling, I think they'll have a puncher's chance in this one. I alluded to the really difficult schedule upcoming. Minnesota goes back home to play Milwaukee on Wednesday, the first time the Wolves will see the Bucks this year. And then Thursday night, just over 24 hours later, the Wolves have a TNT game against the OKC Thunder on second night of a back-to-back, of course, national TV on the second night of a back-to-back, leading into the All-Star break this weekend. So the plan for the week, we'll do the post-game pod Tuesday following Wolves-Cavs on Monday night. Wednesday, we'll talk more about the Wolves offense and the shift that we've seen since Jan 1 of this year. And then on Thursday, we'll do post-game pod from Wednesday. Friday will be post-game pod from Thursday. We'll probably talk a little All-Star break along the way because I always like to give predictions, I should say, although with no Wolves to date planning to participate in All-Star Saturday, that makes it a bit less exciting to talk about. But I'll give a couple thoughts on All-Star Weekend at some point this week too. So a packed week ahead. The Wolves have won 3 in a row. They're 7 games above 500 for the first time this season. They are firmly, they're technically tied for the 6th spot, but have the tiebreaker. They are 6th in the Western Conference and only 2.5 games out of 5th in the LA Lakers, 3 games out of the 4th spot in the West and home court advantage in the first round behind the Houston Rockets, who finally won a game after losing like 5 or 6 in a row. So anyway, we'll be back Tuesday with the postgame pod. Of course, if you can catch the live postcast, that'll be on YouTube on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app following Monday night's game. And I'll be back on Tuesday with the postgame pod. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder of the Locked On Wolves daily newsletter. You can sign up at lockedondaily.com for that newsletter. You'll get it every day, Monday through Friday at lockedondaily.com. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.